think we've started.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is January 27th, 9:30 in the morning, and I called the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Village Board's Finance Committee. Staff will now please call the roll.
Trustee Kennedy.
Here.
Trustee Plunkett.
Here.
Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Everyone is here, so we clearly have a quorum. This meeting is being conducted remotely via Microsoft Teams. For those watching today or in the future, effective June 12th, 2020, Public Act 101640 enacted the Government Emergency Administration Act, which makes permanent changes to the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Under new Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act, public bodies may now conduct remote public meetings by audio or video conference without a quorum being physically present when the governor or director of the Illinois Department of Public Health has issued a disaster declaration related to public health concerns. This meeting is being broadcast live on our local cable access Channel 6. It is also being broadcast on the internet on YouTube Live, and the URL for that is www.youtube.com/user/villageofwilmette/live. If you would like to participate in the meeting, you may use Microsoft Teams app on your device for free. No sign-in is required, and the link to join each meeting is posted on the website calendar of the village at www.wilmette.com/calendar. This morning's meeting will be archived on the village's website, as we do with all our other televised public meetings. A remote obviously requires a different mechanic for public participation, so to ensure that our residents, business owners, and other interested parties have the opportunity to participate in this meeting, we have solicited public comment prior to the start via email. If you sent an email to publiccomment@wilmette.com prior to the start of this meeting, our staff will read the email during the public comment portion of our agenda. If members of the public who are watching the broadcast would like to participate during our designated public comment periods, comments through YouTube Live at the appropriate time, and a member of the village staff will read your comment to the Finance Committee. All comments to the Finance Committee will be recorded in the meeting minutes, as we typically do. Everyone will have joined the meeting today through one of these apps was muted when they entered. When it is time for public comments, those joining us through Teams can toggle their mute status by clicking on the microphone icon on their meeting toolbar. Those joining us by audio conference dial-in can toggle their mute status by pressing *6. Only attendees can unmute themselves. No one can unmute another attendee. And just a reminder, public comment can also be provided by emailing publiccomment@wilmette.com or through the village's YouTube live stream. Before the meeting, the Finance Committee received a packet of agenda materials. These materials are posted on wilmette.com's website so that residents and other interested parties can review the very same materials that the Finance Committee members themselves received. So now I will move on to the agenda. First, I think we should take public comments. Is there anyone participating in this meeting who would like to make a comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Alex, anybody?
I don't believe so.
There were no comments have been submitted through YouTube, and there were no public comments submitted to the public comment email.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, I think Mr. Hallgren, are you doing the presentation of issues, or how would you like to proceed?
Yes, so Melinda, do we need to move through and go do the approval of the minutes from the last meeting first, and then we can move into the discussion sections?
So I have shared my screen, and if we go to starting on page 2, is the start of the minutes to be approved.
Great.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of Monday, June 18th, 2020.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being made and seconded. Melinda, could you call up for a vote, please?
Yes. Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion was approved. The minutes of the meeting of June 18th, 2020 have been approved. Next item on the agenda.
Next item on the agenda is a discussion of the sewer lateral repair assistance program. And I believe Eric is going to lead us in this discussion.
Thank you.
Yes. So I first want to thank the public works staff as well as Alex for pulling together a lot of the information, and community development for pulling together the information that was included in the assistance program. But I also want to preface kind of the overall meeting on the three discussion items between the lateral assistance program, the reserve policy, as well as the financial reports. Today, the intent of the discussion is really for educational purposes and to start a discussion on each one of the different policies. The intent of today's meeting is not to have any final policy decisions, but to provide staff guidance on the development of potential policies or in further investigating each one of these different programs if there's additional materials or additional information that's being requested. So I just kind of want to lay that out as kind of the overarching theme as we go through each one of these discussion items. So as we look at the first item for the sewer lateral assistance program, I think one of the important pieces here is to understand what we're talking about for the sewer lateral piece. And the best we tried to explain it in the memo, I think really summed itself up well with a picture. And looking at what that private sewer lateral is and how it connects each one of the buildings, homes, businesses in the community to the sewer main that is managed by the village. So you'll see that there's the private sewer lateral has that connection, and in that component, in that piece, there is a component that falls within the village right of way where it connects into the sewer main. So this sewer system is a connection point for our combined system as well as for our sanitary system. So on an annual basis, the public works staff goes out and televises our sanitary system to look for potential defects and areas that can be repaired. As part of this process, they make note of different defects that are potentially impacting private sewer laterals, as well as noticing private laterals that are causing damage to public property. So when there is a private sewer lateral repair, when staff notices that, the public works staff will send out an advisory notice to each one of those residences or businesses, letting them know that there is a potential issue on their private sewer lateral. Now, these notices are advisory and they don't have any compliance requirements associated with them. It is merely notifying them that they may want to talk to a plumber or somebody else who can complete that repair. But the main focus of today's discussion is looking at private laterals that are causing damage to public property. So where there's a private lateral that is connecting into the public right-of-way and that there is some sort of collapse of the sewer lateral, there's an issue with the connection between the main and the private system, village staff will send out a notice to the property owner letting them know that there needs to be immediate attention to correct this issue. Now, per the current village code, property owners are required to repair these sewer laterals at a full cost to themselves. And so what we typically see on an annual basis is a range of around 3 to 5 incidents where that private lateral is causing damage to public property. Over the last several years, as we've sent out these different notices, we have received feedback from residents talking about the significant cost associated with these private lateral items that are causing damage to public property. As we go further down into the memo, you'll see an example of the cost, but on average, we're seeing repair costs that are around $10,000 for, and they range from anywhere from around $7,000 up to some costs that are in the $20,000 range. So that is kind of the impetus for this discussion, is looking at what that process is and if there are any potential assistance programs that can be offered for what really is a significant cost to most homeowners.
Mr. Hallgren, I have a question.
Yes.
Are those advisory notices or notice of defect letters, are those available to prospective home buyers? Do we have some way, so if you were buying a house in Wilmette, say on Ramona, and you wanted to know whether there was a problem that was going to be facing you after the purchase, would they be able to contact the village and know that such letters have been issued?
Honestly, I'm not aware of what the process is for what a potential home buyer may know. I think we can look into that more. I know that Bridget is on the call. Are you aware of anything, Bridget, that are provided to potential home buyers?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. If we did receive an inquiry from a potential buyer about a property, we would have that on file and it would be FOIable. So we would be able to look it up and provide that information as well as any other flooding information about the property.
Thank you.
So the next part that I wanted to walk through was kind of the existing process that is associated with those repairs on the public or the private lateral pieces. So after Public Works is identified and sent out the defect notice to the property owner, they typically have 10 days to contact the village to start the process for the repair. This does not mean that a repair needs to be completed within 10 days. It's that the property owner needs to be in contact to recognize that there is an issue. And then we kind of start the process for providing potential contractors that maybe that are eligible to do the work, as well as kind of walking through the process for permitting and all the different steps that are required in repairing that defect. So once work has been initiated by the property owner, that process really then turns over to the community development department, where plans, contractor information is submitted to community development. The project will go through the permit review process, and really the first costs that are borne by that homeowner are the application fees, the permit fees, as well as the permit and plan review fees. So if you're kind of looking at those initial fees, it's around $250, and that there is a deposit if there is work that needs to be completed in the right of way. So since 2018, we've seen an average of about 4 incidents per year. In 2020, there were 3. 2019, 4, and in 2018, there were 5 different defects. You'll notice from the cost chart that several of the locations do not have costs associated with them. On the permit fee or on the plumbing permit, there's a space to put the estimated project cost. That section is not always filled out by all of the potential applicants. But what we do see here is a significant range, like I mentioned before, where you can see costs that range from around $7,000 all the way up to up nearing $20,000. So regarding assistance programs, I also wanted to provide some context as to what other assistance programs are currently available to residents that potentially could be utilized for a private lateral piece. The first one is a 50-50 program that we have for projects that are greater than 12 feet in depth. So this program was started nearly 30 years ago, and the last time it was updated was in 1998. After discussions with the village engineer and the assistant village engineer, they're unaware of any resident requests that have utilized this program since 1998 when it was last modified. The other program that we have is the Emergency Housing Assistance Program, or EHAP, which really is providing assistance to village residents that have limited financial means. Now, typically, this program is more utilized for utilities or rental assistance, or really some of those other more basic costs that are associated with when somebody experiences financial hardship. The $500 limit here really it typically isn't utilized for a significant repair cost such as a private lateral program. So then what we did after looking at what internal programs we had from a village perspective, we started to look at other governmental entities. So we were able to find around 5 regional communities that provided different cost sharing or different types of programs for private lateral assistance. Each one of these has additional information associated with them, but what we wanted to provide here was really a high-level scope of how the program worked. So you'll see that there are some programs that are cost-sharing. There's one that is a full coverage. Also, there's a range of financial assistance that range from a 30% cost share all the way up to, I said, 100%. And then several of them have maximum values associated with them. So Bartlett, for instance, has a $10,000 max, and several of them, they also break it up as to what component of the lateral is eligible for assistance. So the first 3, Elgin, Bartlett, and Des Plaines, really offer assistance for work that is completed within the right-of-way. The Sanitary District in Downers Grove offers assistance for the entire entire private lateral, and then Elk Grove really looks at there's really a no cost for the road restoration component of any lateral work that is completed within the village. So looking at what information or kind of the next steps associated in the review of this lateral assistance program is really several discussion points that we wanted to talk about, or to review with the Finance Committee to see if there's other additional information required, or kind of looking at next steps in the potential development of an assistance program. So ultimately, the decision points that we were looking at for this are, first, I mean, is there interest in providing an assistance program for these sewer lateral repairs? If that were to be the case, then we would look at what types of projects would potentially be eligible for the assistance program. Would there be financial conditions that are associated with the program? And then more into the mechanics of the program, looking at what form should the assistance be? Should there be a 50-50 program? Should there be a grant program, a loan program? And so those are kind of the discussion points that we wanted to have, and really wanted to open up the floor to the Finance Committee to just get thoughts on the process, as well as trying to provide additional information where necessary.
I have a few questions. Should I step in right now?
Please do.
Certainly.
Okay, I think, I would like to kind of have spelled out the public benefit of this program. I mean, obviously we can kind of infer, and we know it's very expensive, but it would be kind of nice to know why we would be doing this, and, who besides the homeowner it could benefit. And I guess on the flip side of that, I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about what kind of damage we are talking about. Is this damage to the sidewalk, damage to the street, if a possible, cave-in, or does this affect at all, like influx and infiltration into the sewer system at the same time? So just a little bit more on that. I think I would like to know.
All right.
On that point, would Bridget, do you have some sort of comment that you want to make towards that? And then we absolutely can take time and dig into that some more.
Sure, I'm happy to. Senta, you hit on it. I'm sorry, Trustee Plunkett, you hit it on the head. I think the two primary public benefits are public safety. Anytime there is a defect in a sewer lateral, typically what happens is the roadbed starts to give way and the road starts to cave in. So whether the break is underneath the street or the curb or the sidewalk, whatever is above it has the potential to start caving in. So when that happens, Public Works will usually get a call for a sinkhole. We'll go out and do the investigation, identify the source of the problem, and then it's really up to Public Works to make sure that the road stays safe between the time it's identified and the time that it's repaired, which in some cases could be 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the financial situation of the homeowner. So it's something we routinely, so there is a cost involved with Public Works staff time and crews monitoring that sinkhole on a daily and weekly basis, protecting it with cones, and just making sure that it doesn't turn into a bigger public safety issue. And then the second public benefit that you touched on, obviously we know we've got sewer problems that still exist in our sanitary system. I&I is probably at the top of that list. So anytime there's a defect in the sanitary lateral, groundwater can penetrate and contribute to the ongoing sewer backup issue. So that's why it's really in the public's best interest to get those fixed as quickly as possible.
Great. I just think that's part of selling this. I think that would be important to just kind of just for the public and for everyone, for the information is why this is, something that's so important.
Bridget, I have a couple of questions about what causes this to happen. I know that the memo and the other materials that we received talked about infiltration of tree roots into it, and also mineral deposits that aren't cleaned out of the lines. When it comes to the part under the roadway, is it possible that vibrations from large trucks also cause problems with the right-of-way line, or is that not an issue?
That's not something that we've seen. And that's typically, if you think of the pipe underneath the earth, it's really protected by the cavity of soil that surrounds it, which is a buffer between any of the vibration coming from trucks driving on top of the road. So it would be highly unlikely that we would be able to directly correlate vibrations to a sewer defect.
Okay, great. And can I just ask another question about, it's notable on your chart that in the last 3 years of the approximately 9 or 10 incidents that are identified, 3 of them occur within a few blocks of each other. Is that simply coincidence, or what does that suggest about the cause?
I don't have enough information based on the details to draw any conclusion other than suggest that it's probably coincidence. Those sewers were probably put in around the same time. They're probably all clay, and they're probably all vulnerable to collapse or disrepair over time. So it's probably coincidence.
Thank you.
Bridget, this is Eric. Just a quick follow-up on that. When we're doing the televising, are we doing that on a village-wide basis, or are we merely doing that? Do we do sections on an annual basis?
Our televising program is both a combination of kind of systematic, looking at basins all in the same area, as well as where we have road improvements. So there's a lot of variety in the areas that we televise, but I think maybe to your point, Eric, if we were televising and finding defects in one particular street and we sent them letters, that might correlate to the fact that we had more defects in that particular area.
So Bridget, I'm going to just follow up because my question's along the lines of Trustee Plunkett's, but make sure I fully understand, and I'm going to maybe dumb it down a little bit for my sake. But if I got one of those letters as a resident that said I need work on my lateral from the village, or I engaged a plumber, and I chose to wait until it failed, am I causing more expense to the village because I'm deciding not to fix it?
Theoretically, well, so there's two types of letters, Trustee Sullivan. The first letter is an observation. When we do our public televising and we can look up the lateral, we may see something that is indicative of a potential problem. At that point, it's not costing the village any additional money. It's a simple step as a courtesy to the homeowner to alert them to keep an eye on it. If there is an actual defect, if there is a repair that's required and it's resulting in a sinkhole that requires Public Works to monitor it on a regular basis, yes, there is that staff time involved that would potentially cost the village more money the longer it takes to get that repair made.
Got it. And given all that we're investing in our sewers, me not fixing this, that to your last point, that's what's I'm just putting more in the sewer than should be.
Right. Right.
Have you found, are you done, Dan? I'm sorry.
Yep. Nope. I don't want Bridget to ever come and scope my line though in this old house that's 100+ years old. So stay away from my address.
So looking at this picture, there's obviously a really long private sewer lateral leading to the street, and then we've got just that small area that's in the public, in the right of way. Have you found when there are defects in the area that's in the public right of way, are there also defects in the private sewer lateral? And are these homeowners fixing that at the same time? Is that adding to their cost? Is it, is it just chance? Is it related?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I just want to point something else out too, when we look at the diagram, it just so happens on this illustration that the public sewer is on the house side of the street, but that public sewer may very well be on the other side of the street, which increases the risk of having something happen under the street, because and increases the cost of the repair too. If there were a break on the other side of the street, and even in locations between the two curbs, then that's probably where you get your $18,000 and $20,000 cost to do the repair.
So Bridget, you mean like this, showing it here, that it really could be over on this side of the street over here?
Exactly.
Yep.
Right. And typically, your instinct is correct. If there is a problem under the public right-of-way, chances are there's defects on the private side of the lateral as well. And, the first thing the homeowner will have to do is televise the whole line. They may not be able to even get to the point that's under the street because of a collapse somewhere in between. So it is. I wouldn't say it's common, but it would not be uncommon for a homeowner to have to replace the entire line from the building foundation all the way to the public sewer.
But the costs that we have are just the right-of-way costs?
That's correct.
And I have another question about the nature of the harm. These are sanitary sewer or combined sewers, which include sanitary waste, correct?
Well, and it could be there's storm sewer connections as well. So it could be a storm lateral. But typically the sanitary laterals are deeper, as are the combined sewers. So that would mean sanitary waste, correct?
And does that create a public health hazard in itself, addition to the property damage?
you know, I guess theoretically there could be some cross infiltration from whatever is leaching out of the sanitary sewer, and it could get into the storm sewer, but it's relatively low risk, and the risk would come downstream in the North Branch, the contamination of the public, waterway versus any risk to a homeowner.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for Bridget or for Eric?
I think for Eric, so this is theoretical and we're not making any decisions right now. We're just getting informed. But what about the homeowners that paid all that money in 2020, 2019? Are we considering that in anything that we move forward, or are we just saying, thinking about from this date forward?
I mean, that isn't something that we put. That's certainly a discussion point that we could have in looking at those different properties. But I don't think the initial intent was. It was really to try to address this issue going forward, kind of based upon the feedback that we've received from several of the locations. I will say that some of the properties within, I believe, the 2020 category, those works may not have been completed at this point in time. Or they're in the process, the permitting process. So I think that there is the potential that we could look at assistance to those properties that have not completed the work at this point in time. I think the other kind of prong of that discussion is if there is a decision to move forward with a concept, we would look at, there is that option to look at financial hardship to see if there are different mechanisms to determine need, similar to what we do as part of the EHAP program. So if we were to do that, that might exclude some of those past addresses that had work completed.
And Eric, with respect to these, the costs that are on that chart, that I take it that's the total cost of the plumbing work, not just the right-of-way portion. Is that correct?
I believe that it is looking at the total cost. The breakdown that is included on the plumbing permit does not get into that level of specificity. So we could do further review on each one of those permits if we were to go forward with a program to look at that breakdown. But unfortunately, we just, based upon the plumbing permits that were submitted, do not have that level of detail.
Should we be getting into more discussion about the different types of financial assistance, or do we want to just leave that for today and have that for another time? I just don't know how deep we should get into this right now.
I mean, if we want to have discussions about what potential options are available, I think that would be beneficial. And I think part of it is just understanding if there is a desire to kind of like, I think what guidance staff would be looking for here is any follow-up, kind of looking at, is there interest in going forward with the program? If there is, do we kind of, what parameters do we want? We could mock up potential program options, but I think the feedback we would look for is kind of what other questions do you have that would require some follow-up, or if there is interest in a program, kind of framing out what that may look like.
I would like to, excuse me, go ahead. Trustee
Well,
Sullivan.
I was just going to ask, I mean, maybe do the three of us, should the three of us first get on consensus? Do we support a financial assistance program or not? Or, and then from there, I think Trustee Plunkett, wouldn't that drive, some different options? I mean, are we in agreement? We want to give assistance, or?
Personally, I would like a little more information on since I think the easiest one to justify would be the roadway, the right-of-way repairs, as opposed to something like Downers Grove is doing, which are they're paying for it all the way to the house. And I don't really have a good sense of what that kind of cost would be, but what portion of the plumbing cost relates to right-of-way repairs.
think in line with Trustee Kennedy said too, I could imagine if I was a homeowner and I had to pay for restoring the street in front of my house, that would just kind of seem a little mind-boggling to me. I don't see any, of these programming. It's 50%, whatever, cost sharing. I'm just kind of curious as to what percentage is public right-of-way restoration versus the work. Does that something that kind of is a possibility? Is that a lot less than the sewer work under the street? Just another thought.
And I also think it might be, I don't know if you can get this information, but it might be interesting to see how much programs like Elgin, Bartlett, Des Plaines, and Elk Grove Village, how much those cost them each year.
Okay, so can I just chime in? So one of the things that I'm hearing is I'll go back to what Trustee Sullivan was putting out there. It seems to me that there is some interest in this program. And what you would like us to do is, if we can, go back through even some of the permits that we were showing you before, some of the work that happened, and start pulling apart those costs, what they were really for. What was the lateral cost versus maybe what was fixing a roadway or restoration or whatever it is, so that you can start to understand the components of what made up those totals. So that way you can sort of make a decision, because I'm hearing one of the things being said is the restoration of the public right-of-way, that you have some sensitivity to, that is something that maybe the village should be handling that particular cost, potentially.
Or sharing.
Yep, sharing in the restoration of that cost. And that if it is possible for us to understand in some of these other communities, as they have made decisions to help in the cost sharing, what they have actually incurred, at least in the last year or so, you would like to know that information as well.
I would. I can't speak for the other trustees, but I would definitely like that information.
Okay.
Trustee Plunkett, Trustee Sullivan, is there?
Well, no, I think Melinda summed it up well. I agreement. I think I'm sensing the same thing, that, not that it's a decision, but, we should explore ways that we can assist the residents. And I don't want to put words in the mouth of Trustee Plunkett or Kennedy, but, I would be open to coming up with a financial assistance program when this occurs. I think, it's for all the reasons that we've talked about, whether it's over the right of way and things that some of our residents question, but it is a big bill. But I also think this is the right thing, program to put in place. And if we can structure it correctly so that, it's reasonable within the village, it's not going to pay 100%. It's not going to, it's going to make a small dent in a big bill. But I also think, given the fact that we are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in our sewers, this is a good program to incent people to fix this in a community that has aging homes. And it's the right thing to do. Sewers are, we've all learned sewers are our lifeline right now. So I'd be up for something, but again, I'm not on the saying it's going to be, a big check. I mean, it's going to be, I'm thinking, capped at a certain level, as well as, and I know we're going to talk further about our reserves. Maybe we tie that to the financial position of the village. It's available if our reserve is X. It's come up with some ideas, but Melinda, I think you said it well. I would like that.
Okay.
I think you said it well too. And maybe we can take one option off the table, because I don't hear a lot of support for doing what Downers Grove is doing and paying full cost of all repairs, regardless of where they occur on the lateral. Is that correct?
I completely agree. And
Okay.
and also, I think the other thing and the hard decision is what Trustee Plunkett alluded to. I mean, you always feel bad for what happened in the past, but we need to cap. We're going to have to say, if you did this, if this happened to you and you incurred this expense prior to 2020, come up with a year. Unfortunately, it wasn't eligible. Maybe there is a little bit of a clawback, but I don't know.
Yeah, to Trustee Sullivan's point, and to one of the items that Melinda and I had a discussion about yesterday, and really was kind of her idea in the space, was kind of the potential to mirror it after our existing stormwater incentive program that we do for like the bioretention systems or the yard drain disconnections, where we provide some sort of assistance up to a certain dollar value. But same with that program is, if somebody installed something 3 or 5 years ago, those weren't necessarily eligible for reimbursement. So I think that there's potential to kind of mirror it after a program that we currently have in place.
So what I would propose that we do now is to tell the staff that there is no consensus for full cost coverage like Downers Grove has for the entire lab. And that when it comes to cost sharing, we need a little bit more information from the staff about cost of right-of-way repairs versus the cost of the entire project for a homeowner, and the cost of road restoration as a component of that total cost. And if possible, some information about the total budget effect of such a program based on the experience of certain communities I have cost sharing agreements. Does that sound about right?
That sounds good. Yeah, and also kind of where it fits into our sewer budget right now, into the overall budget. You know, is there something that we want to take from the budget for this program, or is this adding to where we are? So like in the overall scheme of things, it would be kind of nice to know where this would fit in, or, you know, what we potentially, you know, how much money potentially we're talking about yearly.
Yeah, thank you.
That's actually a good point. I probably confused it. I mean, I assume if we did this, it would come out of the sewer fund, not the general fund.
That was what I said as well. Is that
So that is correct. Yeah, so the intent would be to look at it to take it out of the sewer fund. So I think to kind of dovetail off of that, one of the other things that we can try to do here is contextualize if that would have any potential rate impact or anything down the line. So we will provide that as an additional follow-up to the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Halgren. That would be very helpful. Anything else on this before we move on?
I think, and Eric, unless you see something else, I think we got the sort of the guidance that we were looking for. So I think we know what our next steps are going to be. So we appreciate that.
Well, thank you for what you've provided. It's been very useful in this discussion. Okay. So moving on the agenda.
So the next topic that we're going to talk about is the village's reserve policy. So I think Eric is going to start with the introduction, and then really our hope is that it's going to be an interactive discussion that we have on this topic.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Maybe we should go back for just 1 minute.
Sure.
Mr. Ortega, is there any indication that there's public comment that wants to be made with respect to the first item on the agenda?
We still have not received any comments on YouTube, and let me just double check real quick the public comment email, and no emails to our public comment at wilmette.com address.
So if anybody currently participating in this meeting would like to make a public comment with respect to the lateral repair issue that we just finished discussing, let's give them a few minutes to type something in. Mr. Ortega, do you see anything?
Nope, still no comments on YouTube, and it looks like all the members on this call are within the organization, so we don't have any outside members.
Gosh, no audience. What fun is that? Okay.
There are
They're all saving it to watch it later.
I could have done this in my pajamas. Who knew? Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Ortega. Sorry to interrupt, but back to you, Mr. Halgren.
All right, so again, kind of looking at the village, again, kind of provided a high-level overview on the reserve policy. Again, it's really an opportunity for us to have a discussion about potential policy decisions. The expectation is not that we will develop or craft a specific policy during this meeting, but really to provide that framework, as well as kind of get consensus on, do we want to move forward with making adjustments to the reserve policy, and what other information is needed before we kind of craft that final policy. But what we've laid out here is really 6 different items that we really have identified as potential spaces for modifications to the existing reserve policy. These are not all encompassing. If any of the members of the Finance Committee have additional items that they would want to address, we will certainly add those to the discussion points. But really, this reserve policy discussion is based out of comments that were made during the 2021 budget process, where we wanted additional clarity on the reserve policies and really reviewing what opportunities there were to look at the reserve policy, its calculation methodology, and planning for potential ways to draw down the reserve if we're in excess, or the ability to what we would do if we were to fall below our set thresholds. So I think that those are the kind of the primary discussion points associated with the reserve policy. But at this point, I wanted to turn it over to Melinda to just kind of walk us through the background of our existing reserve policy and kind of the mechanisms in place with that policy.
And really what it was is Eric wanted to take a drink of coffee. So that's why he's pitching it over to me right now. So in terms of the background, what we've done is bullet pointed the 5 points that we articulate in our policy as to why do we have a reserve to begin with. So the first one is really how I will term it. It's the reason of having a rainy day fund, because something might happen that you haven't expected. So you want to make sure you have some sort of reserve there. The second bullet point is really the one that drives how we have crafted the amount that we have in the general fund, and it's truly driven by a cash flow need. So what you're saying in that second bullet point is you want to make sure that you have enough cash during a certain amount of time so that you avoid having to go out and issue any short-term notes or warrants or what have you. So it avoids you having to borrow to take care of expenses in the short run. The third bullet point, self-explanatory. It's tipping its hat to the rating agencies and how they might view you as an entity and suggestions that they would give. The fourth bullet point, again, is somewhat similar to the rainy day fund and saying you want to make sure you have enough there, not just because revenues dip, but because there might be some sort of expenditure, an emergency expenditure that comes up, and you want to make sure, again, that you have enough cash available to manage that. And then the last bullet point was one that we added in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, because it was born out of the thought of we wanted to make sure that we had some sort of way to thoughtfully plan for equipment replacement needs that we had and how we were going to manage that over time. So those are really the policies that are driving the reserves that we have in place right now. So along with that, what we've done in the memo is we've laid out some of the prior discussions that have happened in regards to the reserve policy. So quickly, just touching upon those, some of your predecessors, when they've had discussions before, what started them, going back to really 2015, I'll go back to that point in time, is that it was driven by the fact that we actually finally had the ability to talk about the notion of increasing our reserve policies, because before that we were barely meeting the thresholds that we had in place. So think about the Great Recession and what happened, and if you go back in time and you look at where the village was in anywhere between 2005 to 2010, we really were sitting at around 2 million, and I think in 1 year we were just slightly below that. So we did not have reserves truly to talk about doing anything else with. And because of that, decisions were being made during that point in time to forego capital equipment needs that we had in place because we just didn't have the funds to take care of that. So as we were coming out of the Great Recession, and as economic development activities started to occur in the village, we were starting to get either very large real estate transfer activity that was happening that was really non-recurring. So we've talked about it many times, what was going on along the lakefront, as well as some permit activity that was related to, again, some economic development activity. Think of 611. With that happening, what would occur during the budget process is we were approving a particular year's budget for the next year, and we knew that we had just gotten in some really large real estate money or permits that happened between the time that we had started the process of adopting the budget and the adoption of the budget. And so at the last moment, the board was then making decisions about, well, you have an extra $70,000. Is there a police car that we want to take care of right now? Or do we want to start purchasing a piece of equipment? And it was happening in a very short amount of time. And it was causing some frustration, twofold, in the sense that, number one, decisions were being made in a really short window of time. And the thought of having a larger discussion about all of the needs that we had wasn't necessarily occurring. And then the other frustration was we were making a decision about monies that were coming in the door in that calendar year, and we were making it a part of then the current year's budget. But in actuality, we couldn't spend those dollars and affect the purchases that we needed until the next year. And so it was causing what I'm going to call encumbrance issues. And it was actually having frustrations in the next year because we were still trying to take care of something that we had agreed to at the last moment in the year prior. So for those reasons, in 2015 is really when these discussions started to occur in a more robust way, is let's come up with a framework that allows us to recognize if we are having activity happening that is growing our reserves beyond what we knew of during the budget process. Let's put a framework in place so that in the next year, we can make it part of our budget process and really start thinking about how to use those funds. That's where I said the SURF grew out of those discussions so that we would finally say, not at the last minute during the budget process are we going to be making some one-off decisions. Instead, we're going to end a year, we're going to finish our audit, we're going to know what we have, and then as part of the next year's budget process, we'll have the discussion to say, okay, there was 100,000 more that came in than what we expected. We have all of these capital needs that have been delayed for years. How do we want to handle it? Because we weren't going to be able to catch up on everything right away, but let's start putting a framework in place to start addressing those issues. So that is what happened in 2015, and that's what happened to the reserve policy at that point in time. In 2019, again, we were revisiting the reserve policy. The reason was our reserves, again, were getting stronger than what we had anticipated back in even 2015. So since we had in place a way to start addressing our capital equipment, we also were having discussions about how are we going to handle our public safety pension funds, especially going forward into the future. So wrapped up in the discussions that we were having at that point in time is, and the other discussion that was really occurring was how are we going to handle our road program and the infrastructure needs that we had there. So in a general sense, the change that was made in 2019 was, okay, in 2015, you said any extra money that we have, let's talk about allocating it to the SURF. In 2019, we're saying if we have extra monies, yep, we still want to talk about the SURF, but we also want to talk about our roads, and we also want to talk about our public safety pension funds, that some of those additional monies could go to help address those needs. And then let's also, while we're doing that, because we know we're going to be issuing substantial amount of monies for other infrastructure needs that we have, let's be sensitive to the rating agencies and their requirement of having 30% reserves. So keep that in mind. And if we are above and beyond that, then let's start talking about allocating these monies to these other areas that we have. That's really what happened in 2019. That brings us now to today. So now we're saying, good gracious, we have been able to start addressing not only the public safety, we've given some additional monies to the road program, we have our SURF in place, and even in a pandemic situation, our revenues have performed, well, I'll phrase it this way, not as bad as what we had thought of at one point in time. And we had made expenditure reductions earlier in the year in anticipation of what was going to potentially happen to our revenues. And what it means is that our reserves are stronger than what we had anticipated. So we're in that sort of situation right now. And it caused us to say, you know what, let's go back and revisit our reserve policy and maybe come up with clearer guidelines as we hit certain marks, this is what at this point in time we're going to decide to do with those additional dollars. So as we do that, understanding what our reserve levels are right now is what this section of the memo is trying to help you understand. So the general fund, when we look at what we say our recommended amount, where that number comes from is, as I was telling you before, when we laid out the bullet points, our 5 bullet points that really guide our reserves right now, is the general funds reserve is based solely on making sure we have enough cash to avoid having to go out and issue any sort of short-term notes or warrants. So the formula, how it works, is that we know in January and February, that is when we're going to be at our low point. We have some very large expenditures that are happening. We just got done making our debt service payments in December. We have some insurance payments that need to happen at the start of the year. We have our regular payroll and such that's occurring. But our largest stable revenue source, property taxes, are not going to be coming in until end of February, early March. So what you do is a calculation to say, here's what you think your shortfall is, and we're wanting to make sure that we have more than enough to cover that shortfall until the property tax dollars come in. That's the theory behind our general funds reserve right now. And as you read through some of the other policies that are out there, and as Eric is going to talk about GFOA, there is always this thought in mind as reserves are being put in place to sort of think about and take care of those short-term cash needs. So how you come up with that calculation and what you think that might be, I think you're going to find that thread is actually woven in to the other items, the other policies that you're going to read from other entities, as well as what the GFOA is sort of telling us. So rightly or wrongly, that is how our general fund reserve is built. And back in 2015, we were having a discussion at that point in time to say, is our bar set too low right now? Should we raise it? And the discussion at that point in time is, well, if you raise it and you start to not be able to meet it, then what does that say about you? So right now, we were always able to say there was a rationale for that policy. We were able to meet it. And if we had stuff above and beyond that, we now have a policy of how we were going to use it. So it was almost, why set yourself up for failure? Again, rightly or wrongly, that was the discussion that we had in 2015, that we were not going to change what our minimum was, but instead we were going to talk about, we knew we wanted to have or get to that place where the rating agencies wanted us to be. And if we had additional dollars beyond that, this is what we were going to do with those monies. So that's the thought process behind the general fund reserve as it exists right now. The water fund and the sewer fund, the percentages there are truly in place because you are trying to make sure that when you are dealing with the revenue source that is subject to fluctuations given consumption and Mother Nature, you want to make sure, again, that you have enough in place to take care of the operating needs that you have with those enterprise funds and the debt service payments that you need to make. The motor fuel tax fund, you might have noticed in some of the other entities' discussion of their motor fuel tax funds, they might have a zero policy that they have. And the reason behind that is motor fuel tax funds monies can only be used for particular purposes, and think the road program. The reason why we have the 2 months of revenue is not because we are utilizing those funds for anything other than road work, but rather there have been times in the past when the allocations from the state have either been held up or delayed, and we have the payments that we need to make for the road program work that we have incurred. So we have just tried to make sure that we have had enough cash in place in the motor fuel tax fund to be able to make those payments. So that is just the rationale behind why we say there needs to be at least 2 months worth of revenues. It is appropriated so that we can use all the monies, but we're trying to make sure that we will always have enough cash to make those payments that we need to, that are related to those construction projects. I'll stop there for a moment. Do you have any questions?
I have a question about, as you talk about fluctuating revenues, I understand the property tax very well. What other sorts of revenue streams fluctuate over the course of the year in terms of coming in, when they come in and when we are able to spend them?
So I'm gonna answer the question this way. So we know that our next largest sources of revenues come from the state. And we have lived through times where the state has actually held back their allocation of monies to us for their own reasons in terms of what's going on. So then the next part I'm going to say, so in terms of economically sensitive revenues, sales tax is going to be economically sensitive. Income tax is going to be sensitive. Definitely our real estate transfer. So the interesting part of that one, especially as it relates to this last year, we started off 2020 strong with real estate transfer activity in the first 2 months. It dropped off to next to nothing for a couple months. And then without, I guess it took us all off guard, it just skyrocketed. So in a brief way, that's where there's fluctuations in terms of what's happening.
Thank you.
I think to follow up on that just a little bit is I think that we would have seen January and February are our lowest months just based upon timing, due to the property taxes, due to the seasonality associated with permit revenues, real estate transfer tax, that there tends to be less activity during those winter months. And then even on the sales tax side, December sales really are not dispersed until I believe the month of March. So you still have lower revenues during the first 2 months of the year.
So I think if there's no, I'm sorry, Trustee Sullivan.
No, I think obviously, and I appreciate having this conversation, because I do think, for me, it's just adding some clarity of how we as a board look at this. Because, and Melinda, I know we've talked, and Eric, we've talked about this. It just seems like over the last few years, we've used different terminology of how we calculate the reserve. And I'm just going to focus on the general fund because that's the big one. But, back in 2019 in October, we focused at the Moody side, which was 30% of operating revenues. And that was in our presentation. And then all of last year, we now use 8% of operating expense. I actually agree that the reserve should be based on operating expense. I mean, revenues, you've got the timing issue, but really we need the reserve to meet our monthly obligations to keep the lights on. So if I had my goal of this conversation, which I know is a start, is for, at least the finance committee and then hopefully the board, whether it's, before the new board gets seated, most likely it's the new board. Let's just come up with, how do we calculate this so we show the population, this is how we calculate it. Though I disagreed with President Belinsky's comment at the last budget meeting when he said a floor of 32%, which was the first time we'd actually ever said that. So I think we should, but I don't necessarily disagree if we want to have a floor or a range, because for me, what I'm getting questioned on is how it constantly changes. We can never pinpoint what our reserve is until the actual end of the month or end of the year. And I think that added some consternation for some of the residents, and I know for the board. And so that's really where what would help, just to say, this is what we're going to look at. And I think that gives you as staff the flexibility. But we just need to come up with a percent and how we look at it so we can easily calculate it and say it's 30% of this number.
So Trustee Sullivan, I think, and because I know Eric is going to take the next section, we were having that as part of our discussion, Eric and myself, as we're going forward. So both in terms of when we're talking about percentages, to start clarifying or simplifying, however you want to term it, whether it's of expenses or revenues. That was part of the discussion that he and I were having, and knowing that needs to occur. The other part, in terms of the timing, that's again part of the discussion that he and I were having. And I think that is going to be part of getting folks educated and comfortable about that. But we know that it is a point in time always, number one. But beyond that, it really is going to have to be anchored to our audit. So once the audit is done, that is the anchor, and then we move forward from there. And we always kind of go back to that. But in a point in time and during the month, I think one of the other things that he and I were talking about that again causes some consternation and some confusion is that we, as part of our budget, have to pick a point in time to get the budget completed to say, here's our revenue and expenses for the year that we're projecting for the rest of the year. And there's at least a quarter of the year that is occurring. And we have actually been lucky. We have benefited, however you want to phrase it. But our last quarters for the last couple years have been phenomenal. And so really what happens is, but to get that budget done and approved, we have to stop at some point in time and move forward. So then you're getting monthly reports after the budget, and things are looking, I have to tell you, thankfully, they're looking better, not worse. But then I can understand from people's point of view why it is causing issues, because they're saying, I just approved a budget that says the reserve is this level, but you're giving me a report right now that says it's better or worse, or it's just different. So I'm not understanding why. That we will absolutely be working in a better way to help folks feel comfortable.
You're bracing us for another good ending of 2020, because that's what I think that's what we need to figure out too, because and jumping again to the next section, which I know is your monthly report, we forecasted 13.4 million, and
yes,
as of end of November, we're at we're $1 million higher. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think for me, what I would like to be able to say is, to your point, we have good years. The $1 million excess is already been allocated. It's just delayed in bills or whatever you're going to tell me, or we had a good, things worked out better than we had forecasted. And so our plan to spend the excess, or how do we want to use the excess? And maybe we don't. I don't want to speak for the other two trustees, but maybe it just that goes into Belinsky's comment, or President Belinsky's comment on a floor and a ceiling, and maybe we have a range and we're comfortable. So that's ultimately my goal. And I know you guys it's a struggle because the budget process is so long, and you have to do a budget 6 months before we go with a year. That's hard. And especially this year, where we didn't know. And by the way, I was the one, I was doomsday back in March. The fact that we're at where we are is flabbergasted, but I don't want to take it for granted either.
So I think then, okay, I'm absolutely shocked by just how well things have been. I am thankful that is the case. It is allowing us to accomplish things that we need to. But I think then this is a great segue now into what Eric is going to talk about with the discussion section and the chart that you have in front of you.
Yeah, I was going to say that both of you provided me a fantastic transition just into the discussions about the current reserves. And I think you both really highlighted kind of one of the limitations associated with the existing reserve policy and kind of the calculation method is what we've included here looking at the current reserves is really looking at the 2021 budget figures, because it did give us that one point in time measurement that we've all utilized during the past several months. But we do know that these reserve levels are going to be higher than what the calculations are here, just based upon that fourth quarter performance. From the revenue side, looking at different permits and real estate transfer tax items that have come in significantly better than initially projected. So really the intent here was to just provide that snapshot of where we are at in relationship to our different reserve targets. So you'll see our 2-month minimum reserve that is our existing policy is really around the $5.2 million mark. When we look at what our 30% goal is, we're a little bit closer to $9.1 million, but in both of those instances for the general fund, we're exceeding that reserve target by a significant amount. We're around 37%. We know that number is better now, but at that point in time, that's where we were at. And then looking at the water and sewer fund, again, we were at around a 39% mark for the water fund and around 30% for the sewer fund. And we know that revenues in those spaces came in a little bit better, especially on the water side, due to some of the consumption that we had over the summer months. So again, this is really just kind of providing that one snapshot moment of the reserves. And not at this point in time, I don't think our intent was to talk about how to bring these reserves down at present, but to Trustee Sullivan's point of looking at what mechanisms can we potentially add to the reserve policy about a drawdown method over time if we start to see reserves in excess of what our targets are.
Yeah. And again, I like I know we're high on 37%, and we probably will go higher. You haven't told me if December is going to be better or worse, but my sense from Melinda's smile is it's going to be better than November. So it's going to go up, but we're not. And somebody made a comment about, other government bodies just accumulating cash. We're not doing that. We are spending the money. We've got big projects, and you showed me the analysis, and it's in there. If we lose our debt rating, it's really we're not getting the best deal for our residents.
Right. That's correct. And my hope is that one of the things that's going to come out of here is especially, and I think we understood this past year and what we were living through is that we were really focused on what was happening in the current year, and it was very narrow. I think one of the things that's going to happen is to help people, again, put this into some sort of better context, is to look at it over the next 5 years, given all the things that we're planning on doing and trying to accomplish. So I think looking at what reserves are going to look like over the long term, given those decisions, is also going to help put into perspective. This year might have ended at this level, but because of decisions that we've already made or policy decisions that we want to accomplish, it is already going to take these reserve levels down. But that also needs to be a part of the discussion that we're having. But again, please understand, in this current year being last year still, 2020, we were very focused on month by month what was happening and how bad could it actually get for us.
And I sort of want to reiterate what Ms. Malloy said earlier. One reason that it looks so good this year is because very early in the second quarter, we reduced expenses that were we reduced expenses and paid out less than we had budgeted. Mm-hmm. Now it turns out that was in hindsight probably not necessary, but we didn't know that at the time. I would have done exactly the same thing. So some of those expense savings are permanent, but some of them are just deferral of things we had meant to pay for, and we're going to have to pay for them now or in the near future, or we're going to have a diminution in the quality of village services. So some of this is really a deferred spending issue as well as a difficulty of forecasting issue, I think.
I'd also like to talk about, I know that, you know, currently we're operating, I think there's a little bit of an operating deficit, if I'm correct, that, you know, our expenses are higher than our revenues in the general fund. And I guess if we get more, you know, retailers coming in, more sales tax, we can balance that. But kind of that discussion, I'm not suggesting that we use reserves for that, but, you know, in the greater picture, how do those, you know, how do we look at that whole picture, you know, with somewhat of an operating deficit and with these increasing reserves? I feel like in 2019, when we did the reserve policy, we talked about it and we earmarked specific funds, right? This is, we're going to pay this much for the pensions. We're going to pay this much for the comprehensive plan. But it didn't seem like there was kind of like that SURF policy that said, if we hit this target, then we are going to roll over these funds extra to spend. And maybe I'm incorrect on that, but that was kind of my understanding.
I don't think that that's an incorrect statement. There is always this thought that as we had extra monies, that those additional dollars can go into the SURF. But reiterating one of the things that both myself and Eric have been saying is our hope out of this is that we are going to develop a policy that everyone feels has a more clear way of delineating the trigger and where people are saying automatically dollars are going to go to. So that way you won't need to make that comment going forward, that we can start prioritizing, saying if we're over this, the first bucket that we're going to fill up is going to be here. Now, we've already made some commitments when it comes to the public safety pension funds and to get that 15-year rolling amortization in place, so that we would say this much is going to get allocated here, this much is going to either go to the SURF, and or we say we're going to allocate this money now to infrastructure programs, i.e. the road program. Or there could be an alternative that we come up with as well.
Yeah, and to Trustee Plunkett's first point about kind of that potential structural issue that we are dealing with, I think as we move through 2021 and into 2022, and we start to see a recovery in the overall economy and kind of our local revenues, is we're going to be able to better assess what that structural impact of the pandemic was and kind of see in what place we are moving forward. So that's certainly something that we continue to monitor and will keep the board and the finance committee apprised of. But it's something that we just don't know what the totality of that impact is at this point in time.
Right.
And I think actually the optimism that we all felt at the end of December about when we would be out of the pandemic has dimmed a little bit as the vaccine rollout has proved to be less robust than hoped for. And then we don't know how much longer it'll take businesses to recover after we return to sort of fully open and normal business. I think there's an awful lot of uncertainty, and the numbers are still going to be speculative to some extent, I think, for at least the rest of this year.
So the one thing I'll add to that is Eric and I both attended, it's called a financial forecast forum. It happens every year by a statewide group. So it covered 2 days, and yes, we did it virtual, so we were not in person at it. But in the various discussions that were happening in presentations, it's not surprising, to your point about, again, this whole feeling of uncertainty and not sort of understanding. But here's some of the takeaways that I had from it. And I think, Eric, if there's additional things, please chime in. But one of the items was there is optimism for the recovery in the economy. So as they had a gentleman from the Fed talk about it, that was one of the things that sort of definitely came out if you look at what the Fed is looking at over the next couple of years. So they are seeing a recovery happening. What I think is unique to Illinois is, and we talk about this all the time, Illinois and the state has significant challenges and how it is going to meet its challenges, I think, is going to, at some point, adversely impact municipalities, because I think our share of state revenue is going to, that formula is going to change as they are dealing with their own issues. The change in retail space and how that is going to continue going forward, there were some really interesting discussions about that. What is going to benefit us in a great way is that our sales tax truly is, we all know, is not driven by necessarily large stores or malls that we have. What it has been driven by is grocery stores, and that continues to perform very well. But the other thing is, as we talked about before, the change in the collection of internet purchases and how that sales tax money is going to get allocated, we should have every reason to believe that that is going to be a positive for Wilmette, because it's going to be then at the point of delivery. And it does look like it's going to include the home rule sales tax portion. So again, those would be positives for the village. What is also a positive for the village is what we have told you about with the real estate transfer activity. The housing market in Wilmette and on the North Shore is on fire right now, and it continues to be. So we are continuing to see strong activity. Is this driven by the pandemic? It could be, because as part of all of this notion of, are people going back to the office, or are we all going to be working from home? It is impacting that activity, which again has been a positive for Wilmette. So I'm just throwing that out there because we do have some reason to believe that there are some positive changes that have happened because of this pandemic that have benefited the village, is what I'll say.
No, I would again echo those comments that it is, we are in a very fortunate space because of our strong mix of different revenues. There's always risk, but ultimately we are well positioned to come out of this better than some other localities.
If I could
So I think the last section, kind of the current reserve piece, was kind of going through and looking at the sewer fund and the stormwater utility, just because that's a unique component to the village's overall reserve calculation. I believe Melinda was going to talk through that.
In here, I'm going to make it really quick. We know that, as I had said before, the reason why we set the levels that we did for the water and the sewer fund had to do with the fluctuations in consumption. The stormwater component is not subject to fluctuation, but it still has that 20% reserve. I think that is an area that we know we can look at reducing that amount that we say we need to have in reserve. By doing that, the implication of this is going to be that it will help in terms of the overall fee and the growth in that fee potentially over time. So that is one that we are going to work on, but I definitely think that we need to carve that out. We've sort of talked to you about that before, but that will be a part of this process as well, is looking further into that and coming up with a number that makes more sense, given that that revenue source is not subject to the fluctuations that we're seeing with regular water and sewer collections.
So the next area that we, after kind of reviewing where we were at from our reserve levels, was really looking towards best practices in the industry. So we really looked at the Government Finance Officers Association, looking at the rating agency, and then also looking at our comparable communities. So the first piece is we looked at GFOA. Their reserve recommendations they looked at 2 months of regular revenues or expenditures for the general fund, and then for the for the enterprise funds, they looked at around 45 days worth of annual operating expenditures. So to kind of relate those back in percentage basis, the general fund is looking at somewhere around 17%, and the enterprise funds are looking at around 12%. What GFOA did in their recommendations was really provide the different options that are available for the policy. So to Trustee Sullivan's point about whether you look at revenues or expenditures, their guidance is really look at what is the most stable aspect of the municipality's operations and then base it off of that. So for us, it would really make sense to shift over to expenditures because we really do have a more, that is the more stable aspect of our financial picture, especially at this point in time, comparatively to revenues. And then Melinda was going to talk through the rating agency component.
So just in the interest of time, because we've talked about this several times before, and it's been in the memos that we've given to you. We know that for a long time, our reserve position was a credit negative for us. And as those reserves continued to build all of it over the last several years, really in the last, I'm going to say 3 years, it has now become actually a credit positive for us. So there's a lot of other factors that are involved. One of the big ones for us is the wealth of our community. That is a strong factor in terms of what allows us to continue to be a triple rated entity. The credit negative beyond the reserve and where it was at for a long time was where we were at with our public safety pension funds and the funding levels there. And the fact that we have moved to a policy of going to that 15-year rolling amortization, not that, again, that they say that that's the policy that they want to see you do. Instead, why they see this as a credit positive is because it actually allows us to tackle the growing unfunded liability that has occurred over time. That is why they have gravitated towards this idea and now see that as a way that we are tackling that issue. So even though their calculation that they do for us when they look at our pension funds is going in the wrong direction still, it is growing by a smaller amount, and they know if we stay on track with this 15-year rolling amortization, it is actually going to come back to where it needs to be. So just keep those things in mind when we talk about the rating agencies. They set their floor at the 30%, which we know now we are there, and actually a little bit better. And then dovetailing off that, we had asked PMA that with our last issuance, when we knew that this was a phenomenal market both times that we went this past year in 2020, if we had been downgraded, what could have been the additional cost if we actually had received a downgrade? And they gave us some idea here, and it's substantial. So what it does is it helps us understand why should it even matter if we're a AAA. Here's why it matters. We know we still have large capital projects in front of us, so we know we are going to be going to the market. So we are going to want to do everything that we can to continue to show that we're being fiscally responsible to maintain that AAA rating so we can get the best rate that we can.
Melinda?
Yes.
In addition to the stormwater projects, what other debt? Oh, and the probable construction of the police station, right? Yep. What other major projects do you think in the next 5 years we will be needing debt for? We
have some more water plant. It's the water plant intake. That is a significant capital expenditure that we will undertake as well. So, and we can lay out, we've put some stuff together that shows over the next several years some of the items that we're looking at, but that really, so in the big picture ones, it is funding the rest of the stormwater work that we're doing. It's the police station, it's the water intake replacement that we have to do for the water plant. Those are the major ones. We do have some other water plant work to do, but in terms of significant, those are the big significant ones on the horizon.
So the total for those, do you happen to have that off the top of your head?
I don't, but you know, we do have a chart that has it all together. So we absolutely will put that together, refresh it and send it out as part of the discussion. We do have several
Yeah, so we as part of the CIP process, we identified all the projects that are potential bond issuances over the next 10 years. So we will provide that as a follow-up item of what those projects are, what year, and the potential values.
Thank you. I know it's in the budget documents. I'm just too lazy to pull them out.
Oh, and Melinda, we would talk about the water plant. What about, we've discussed the water main replacement. Is that something that we add to that? Because that sounded very expensive.
It is, and so, all right, so one of the ways that we were going to tackle that is with the new customer that we brought on board in 2020. So a portion of those additional revenues were to start tackling that replacement. So to your point though, depending on how quickly we want to get things accomplished and how it might fit in with other road work that we're doing, it could be one that at some point in time we're going to say, maybe you need to bond for a portion of that work and use then those revenues to make the debt service payments on that. That could be something. We haven't gotten to that place yet, but you are correct. It is, as we've just, with the sewer lateral work that we talked about, we are an older community. We have that infrastructure that is aging and needs to be replaced. So we are going to need to make policy decisions about how quickly we want those items handled and how they're going to fit into the bigger picture of what we have going on. So I think, yep, Eric, I think that was going to talk about. I was going to say
the last component of looking at our best practices is really looking at our regional communities. So what we've put together here is a list of, I believe, 11 other communities that are regional or have a AAA bond rating. I believe all of them do have a AAA equivalent with one of the major rating agencies. So it's really trying to provide an apples to apples comparison of communities that are in the same financial same financial state that the village is. But what you really, the big takeaway to me from this chart is really that there is no consistent methodology amongst communities. They all have developed their reserve policies based on some specific issues that are associated in their community. If you look for Lake Forest, for instance, they have a component related to accrued leave. So they're trying to deal with some specific aspect of their operations through their reserve policy. But what you typically find is the reserves that range anywhere from the 25 to 35% mark, and but there is a variation whether people base it upon their revenues or they base it upon their operating expenditures. So to me, the takeaway here is that there isn't a wrong way to do it. It's just providing a strong framework and providing kind of that understanding of why we've developed the policy in the way that we have. So the takeaways that we're looking for as part of this discussion, again, have been laid out here below, of looking at what are trying to develop that framework for a potential policy update. Do we want to confirm what our existing reserve levels are? Do we want to update our policy document to provide something that is a little bit more, for lack of a better term, simplified, providing clarity on how our reserve is calculated? And then other options include kind of developing a reserve replenishment plan in case we drop below our goal or our target value, and kind of the situation we're in right now of developing a drawdown plan if we are in excess of our goals or our minimum requirements. So I think we kind of want to open up the floor to ideas that you would like to see included in a revised policy document.
Well, I sort of I think let's take this as a blank sheet of paper and all the information you have, and at least as maybe, and I don't want to speak for Trustee Kennedy since it is her committee, but write a policy that we want to live by the next, let's assume next 4 years. And so there's consistency of, because, if I understood what you said, there's the capital projects that we present in the budget that are 90 million over the next 4 to 5 years. So you have some good forecasting, and, a good way just to show, educate both the board and the community. This is how we calculate the reserve, and maybe we do have a ceiling or a floor and a ceiling and the ranges, and it's not punitive if we go above it. I mean, if we're way above it, then the board has to act. And I think, today the fact that we're slightly higher than expected is a good thing, given all of our uncertainty of what's going to be the long-term effect of COVID. So my view is right. I think doing it on expenses is a little bit easier, Eric, to your point of that's a little bit more stable and you can forecast what we need to cover. But I could also justify revenues if the board prefers that. And I do like funding. I think that I do like the SURF and funding some of that, at least allocating, because it's a good discussion point with the board. Again, your challenge is the timing of how we get things in, and I think in an effort to overeducate us, we probably have a lot more too much material, so it's confusing in some of the numbers. Where and I go down that path of this report says this and differences. So just how you present it, and again, I think you both did a phenomenal job this last year educating us on the financial strength or the financial stability of the village on a month-to-month basis, and that made it helpful. So, to me, you've given a lot of ideas. I think we just start to lay it out and say this is what we want to live by, and how can we do it so it's efficient and explainable.
Yeah, I would second everything that Trustee Sullivan has said. And the other thing I would add is that in the last few years, there have been some concrete steps taken to make better sense of our finances, the service being one of them, and the 15-year amortization rollout for the pension plan debt, and the building up of the reserve fund, which is frankly far too low for a period of time. I think that the planning that we've been doing in recent years is phenomenally good, and we're going to have some fluctuations between what we expect and what actually happens. That's what we forecast, and what actually happens, that's just going to be reality. But I think that what Trustee Sullivan said is where we want to go from here. So, and thank you to everybody. It's been wonderful.
Oh, and I think we should be proud. I mean, again, it's not like we're stockpiling cash. We're making some improvement. I mean, yesterday was a perfect example with the snowstorm. The fact that I think all of the streets and sidewalks and alleys were plowed within 24 hours of when the first flake landed, that's pretty impressive. So,
well, it is.
Yeah, I mean,
one of the other things that was good for us last year is we didn't have snow. So, we're good.
And we had a lot of, and we didn't have much rain. Melinda did her hot summer dance. So.
Right, we had rain in the spring when it didn't do much for the summer grass, but absolutely.
So I'm going to echo Trustee Sullivan and Kennedy. I mean, we really appreciate the detailed and financial information. I think one thing, and I don't know if this is a good suggestion or just to clarify, I think the SURF is such a great program that we can concretely see that if we have extra money, it goes into the capital equipment replacement fund, and we know what those are sent for. And I'm wondering, on our reserve policy, if we hit a certain trigger, and we obviously don't want to spend down more than X amount per year, but if we hit a certain trigger, will that go to our ongoing infrastructure projects, kind of like the SURF, but on a bigger level? And is that reimbursing us for that, or is that investing more? I think just something that like I said, it's an idea, but I think the SURF is something that we can all clearly understand, and I'm wondering if we can do some kind of trigger like that on the reserve where it does go to, you know, our infrastructure investments.
So to that point, Trustee Plunkett, I think you might recall that we were having a discussion at one point as we were seeing our reserves looking as in a better position than what we had anticipated as the year rolled out. That when we were looking at Central Avenue, that was one that we were talking about doing a bond for at one point in time as a way to be able to manage the expense. That really, if the reserves are at a level that allow us to, that now could potentially be a program that we would say you can actually use some of the reserves so that you do not have to incur the cost of doing a bond issuance for it. I'm not saying that's where we're going to move to. I'm just saying that was one of the ideas, to your point, about we took care of pension, SURF, infrastructure. Here's now a project that we said we were going to use bond proceeds for. Do we now have the ability to either not bond for that program or even reduce the amount that we would have to issue, which means then the overall cost to us, then it's just a better way to potentially manage it. There'll be a larger analysis of that, but to your point, we are trying to contemplate those things.
Great.
Right. I mean, so Melinda, I feel that we have the direction that we need. I think
Yep.
that if I'm understanding correctly, it's really to develop a policy that we can review and add in some of the items that we've talked about, looking at kind of streamlining that document, clarifying what the calculation is, and then providing some framework for the replenishment and the drawdown plans. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is.
I would agree.
All right.
So this
And
All
is the
right.
plan just to bring this back to the finance committee then?
Yeah, so with each, and I should have laid that out at the beginning, the intent here for each one of these 3 items is that we would come back to the finance committee for a final review of the different plans or the different reports, and that there would be a recommendation then provided to the village board at that point in time.
And then, so, I guess, you know, to my point of all the financial work that you're doing, I mean, when ideally for you and Melinda, do you want some direction? Like that's going to help you with the budget process for 22 and all of that. I mean, when do you want us to try to sort of timing?
So do you mind if I jump in? And then,
Go ahead.
Eric, obviously you shared as well. Really, that's why we're starting this conversation in January. So on the one hand, it's a little bit tough because we're trying to get everything done and cleared up for the audit. But to your point, Trustee Sullivan, my hope is that we can get something done within the next couple months here so that before we start the budget process, we have something more clear in mind and that you as trustees are feeling comfortable with that as we're having policy discussions about the budget. So really, in terms of a time here, not that I'm trying to shoot myself in the foot, but I'm hoping that we have decisions done by May on most of this, truly, that we really feel good about what we've done, that whether it's just that the finance committee feels good about it, and then the next month we're bringing it to the board, but that we get these in place before we start our discussions about next year's budget in earnest.
Got it. And then, sorry, Trustee Kenny, I know our next thing is the November numbers, but when is your next sort of planned presentation to the board, a financial update?
So, way to put me on the spot. But
I was looking at Eric, but you can answer. No, I'm teasing.
we have had this discussion, and I'm asking for it to wait until maybe the second meeting in February. And I don't mean this in a bad way. It's pushing it. And the reason why I'm saying that is when we are closing the year, there is a lot that is involved with this. So can I tell you, do I have a lot of the revenue numbers in place? It's the expenditure side really that I'm trying to get in finalized invoices and what have you. And I know that might sound crazy, but it takes us a while to get all of that in. So do I feel like I could give you something by the end of February? I can, but it's not going to be the audited numbers. It's going to now be what I think is the best number I could give you at that point in time is I'm still, because my field work for the audit, I just had a preliminary day 2 weeks ago, but my field work starts in the latter part of February.
Yeah, no. And again, it probably was a selfish question on my part, but I think, maybe even laying out, this isn't an agenda item, it could be new business, but laying out sort of a schedule to manage expectations. I know, I get antsy on some of that, and that sometimes leads to tough conversations. So just knowing that, and you got a lot going on. And it's even harder because I'm sure the accountants aren't in there, or maybe they are, but it's so. Okay,
So
no, that's fair.
Yeah, to Melinda's point, I think that the goal here was really to set that framework of we can I don't know, piecemeal maybe isn't the right word here, but that from a reserve policy, we can try to tackle that within the next several months, potentially end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter, have some final recommendation. And then when we look at the reporting piece, that we can look at that during the second quarter, so that all of these different components really help to inform how we move through the 2022 budgetary process. But there are some areas here where we can tackle them immediately, and then there are other ones that have a longer time frame associated with them. But I think Trustee Sullivan again read ahead in the document and gave us that good transition into the financial report structure about what we want to do of, again, trying to simplifying or providing more detailed information on specific reports. So again, here we were trying to provide, moving on to that next agenda item, again, here is just providing that high level overview of what the existing reporting structure is, looking at the monthly financial reports, and then looking at a potential schedule for the monthly reports as well as the different annual reports. So the feedback that we're really looking for when we look at all of our financial reports is, what is the information that we think is of the most value to review on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis? Look at options for adding or amending our existing report structure, and then providing those recommendations to the village board. So I wanted to turn this over to Melinda real quick to just kind of briefly run through those major reports that we do on an annual basis.
So I'm going to save a lot of comments as we talk later about the monthly financial report. Again, the reports that you receive right now, historically before 2020, it was born out of work that had happened with your predecessors on this committee to come up with something that they felt could help keep them better informed about how revenues were coming in, how expenditures were going out the door, and what it meant for us for the rest of the year. And they really wanted a comparison to the prior year, just to give some sense as to what was going on. What was received before, they felt didn't give them that sort of flavor. And then really, as time has gone on, as whether it has, in some cases, it could have been one of yourselves, or again, your colleagues or your predecessors on the board, they have had questions at times that as they've read through the reports that they have said, hey, I would really like it if you could add this to the report, because that's something that I want to monitor or is of interest to me. So I'm saying all this because when we started this report, it was not the size that it has become. It is growing as we are trying to respond to questions that individuals have to help them understand things better. And I don't say that as a criticism, but I can understand that if you get away from the report for a while and then you come back to it again, the size of it now at times can become a bit overwhelming because there is so much detailed information in there. So it is one of the things, again, that I think it is a good idea, just like our reserve policy, that every so many years we talk about looking at it again, and are there ways that we can improve it? We're definitely, it sounds to me like we're at that place with the monthly report, because the amount of work that it takes to produce it, if it is not helpful to trustees in terms of the policy making decisions that they need to do, then I definitely need to go back to the drawing board and put something together that you do find effective in terms of helping you make the decisions that you need to make. So the other thing that occurred then this last year is that we, in some ways, ended up with 2 monthly reports. One was what I had just described, and the second one became a way to try to understand the implications of the pandemic and what it might mean on us. And unfortunately, what happened at times is in the reading of those 2 documents, there were 2 purposes that ended up causing confusion. If you could look at them independently and understand what they were trying to accomplish, it was one thing. But again, the volume of information that that was provided in those 2 reports, it is understandable why it could at some point cause confusion if you lost sight of what the 2 reports were trying to do. Which is something now that Eric and I, as well as with Mike, have had a lot of discussion about what can we do to not pare this down for the sake of paring it down, but how can we focus on certain items again that, again, is going to become a useful tool for the trustees. So I'll say that the monthly disbursement report, quickly, it's one that you see. It's usually at the first meeting of the month. And this is to allow you to see all of the checks and the wires that we have issued so that you have that sense. There's a summary report on top, and then you get a report that comes out of Munis that, again, gives you some additional information in terms of specifics. So if you ever have questions in terms of a vendor that we've paid and why, please reach out to me and let me know, and we will provide that information. The CAFRA, I don't think we need to spend time on that. You know that that's our annual reporting that we do that is directed by our outside auditor. And again, there's a tremendous amount of information in the CAFRA. The actuarial valuations, those are done so that we know how to fund our pension funds and how to fund our Section 105. The annual treasurer's report, this is a statutory requirement. The reason why it was out there is that you have smaller entities within the state that actually were not producing financial statements. So this was born out of a statutory requirement. From my perspective, in some ways, it is not the most useful tool for us, since we not only do a financial statement, but we do a CAFR. But it is a statutory requirement that we fulfill the annual treasurer's report. So that is, I'm gonna cut it off there unless you have a particular question about it, because I think really what is going to be helpful is more of this discussion that I was trying to lay out before, is the reports that we were doing monthly to help you understand some different items that were going out there, and some creative ideas, I'm going to say, that Eric and I have been discussing about how to help have maybe more pointed, helpful discussions going forward, and to give people a sense of when we would have those discussions. So with that, I'm going to pitch it back over to Eric. So you're on mute, Eric.
Good thing I didn't provide anything of value in those first sentence. So looking at the monthly financial reports, as Melinda laid out, we really had 2 as we were working through this past year, just based upon the pandemic. But 2 of the things that I think Melinda and I both have discussed is really that there's 2 items to be addressed. The first one is that there is a significant amount of information being provided, that we really want to try to pare that down to have a more focused discussion on the financial status of the village. The second portion is really looking at comparability. One of the things that we both recognize is that reports often will have things organized in different ways. One report might have salaries and wages, and it groups together all the benefits and all the wages and all the overtime. Another report might break it down into those smaller components. We really want to try to provide something that's consistent from the budget to the monthly reports to other reports that we develop. That's really the first part, is trying to address the comparability piece. The second portion is really looking at a potential schedule for the reports on a monthly basis, and this is really to provide those more focused reviews. So what we've laid out here is really a sample calendar of the different months of when we would report something, the reporting period, and then what those reports could potentially be focused on. Now, we've developed those report focuses based upon specific triggers throughout the year that really are going to lend the most information to have a good focused discussion on these particular items. We will certainly build out or generate a full year calendar at the request of the Finance Committee, but what we wanted to provide here was a sampling of 3 months of the year. So if we were looking at the month of May, this would really be looking at a reporting period of April. Well, the new receipts associated with sales tax based upon the new distribution methodology are expected to be received in the month of April. So what we wanted to provide in the month of May is a sales tax and home rule sales tax revenue analysis. We would dedicate essentially 1 to 2 pages of just a discussion on sales tax, providing a robust amount of information on that topic, providing a breakdown of the different categories of sales tax, providing information on a historical context for sales tax. And so it's really being focused on that one particular item. We will also provide some standard information if there's other trends that the village is seeing, but the majority of the focus would be on sales tax. Looking at the month of June, as Melinda mentioned earlier, we tend to receive our actuarial valuations in the month of May. So we would look at potentially having a discussion on benefits during the month of June, where we can provide an update on the different benefit packages provided by the village, but also looking forward at pension funding as a potential area of focus discussion. And then the last area is in the month of August, having the discussion about stormwater utility revenue. This would take place after the second quarter billing and hopefully post bond issuance in this upcoming year. And what we can do here is provide a focused review of the credit and the incentive program, how the stormwater utility is performing, and then provide a forecast of what potential future rates may be. So long story short, the intent here is really to give that focused review on one area of interest for the board, while also still providing some of the baseline material for our monthly reports. What we wanted to get from your feedback on is what types of information would you like to see? First, if you are agreeable to kind of taking this more focused approach, and then secondly, are there specific areas that you would like to see a focused review of?
Speaking for myself, I am really delighted to see the report focus procedure. I think that it is really helpful to see these issues in isolation and talk about them in depth rather than as part of a large discussion of many topics. So I think this report focus section is great.
Okay.
And I want to add too, so maybe Eric and Melinda, I mean, obviously the trustees are one audience that you are doing this for, but what has been most helpful for staff and for you in really when you want to get a picture of this? I feel like when you started coming up with, some of the monthly reports on the pandemic, it was just like some of these things were really obvious to see. And, are some things that you do more helpful, to staff in getting the clearest picture of our financial status?
So I'm going to say that is a great point. So I'm going to answer the question with two sort of thoughts. One is, and I've relayed this before, the report that Eric developed with the matrix for us to think about how the pandemic could potentially impact us, the rating agencies loved. And if you think about how early on, and we got something like that in place, and we were starting to have discussions about going to the market. So when the rating agencies saw this, and again, they're dealing with entities from all over the country, extremely impressed that we had gone to that level of detail and had sort of had these different levers in place to think about what might happen, and understood we were grabbing from all kinds of areas that we could at that point in time to help us inform what those projections were going to be. So number one, the rating agencies, that was a boon for us to be able to say that there was some thought going into not just saying, well, we think things could be bad, but that we actually had something that went out for the year and looked at potentially how bad it could be and why we thought it could be different levels. Our financial advisor, working again nationally, but they liked it so much that I think they were trying to educate their other clients to do something similar, because again, in questions with the rating agencies, they were not able to handle those. So we already had a report from the get-go when we were answering our initial questions with the rating agencies to say, yep, and not only do we have this, but we discussed this with our board and they're educated about it as well. So I'm going to tell you, in terms of a tool, is it a useful tool? It absolutely is. Is the information that's in the monthly report, what I'll call the regular one, is it useful information? Yes, because there are times where it helps us to think about what is going on. But it really is a report that's telling you, in the last month, here's the activity that happened, and we either expected it or we didn't. And because of that, we're now going to tell you we think we're going to end the year in a different way. Does that always need to occur? It does. The reports were doing two different things, though. And I think as we continue to go through the pandemic, there is still a need for these types of analyses to happen. So the way I'm answering your question is, are they tools that we need to have? Yes. What I'm trying to understand, or that we're trying to understand, is how do you need to see that tool or tools to help you feel like you have the information you need to be able to make policy decisions? That's really what I'm trying to ascertain as we have these discussions.
Yeah, and I feel like to kind of contextualize that a little bit is that we will still be doing a lot of those underlying reports of the very detailed revenue and expenditure reports. But what we want to bring forth to the board on a monthly basis is really when there is triggers met. So if revenues aren't performing as well, or there's savings in expenditures, or there's unforeseen expenditures, that there are different triggers that would have us bring that information forward to the board, as opposed to providing a large dump of information on a monthly basis. Is that by having a focus review, we can talk about specific items, but we can also then weave in where there are positives or where there are potential negatives. So it doesn't take away any of that underlying report work that is being done, but it's just trying to synthesize that information into something that is more digestible for the board as well as for the public.
So Melinda, if I understand your point, the monthly report is essentially a snapshot in time based on what we actually know.
Yes.
And the other report is prospective looking. It's an attempt to project where we're going from that snapshot. Is that accurate?
It is, in the sense of here, and here's the only little nuance difference to that. So the monthly report always had in it where we thought we were going to end the year. So it started with the budget. It said, here's how we've performed thus far, and then how does that inform how now we think we're going to end the year. The nuance difference is that the report that we created in 2020, the additional one, said, now we're going to take that to the next level, and now we're going to make assumptions based on if this and this happens with revenues, and if we make this and this decisions with expenses, not because we had made those decisions yet, or that we knew for sure something was going to happen, but what could that now mean for how we might end the year? So
Right.
it's you are right, it was more looking forward, not that the monthly report didn't, but it was actually taking it, and it was in some ways, I'm going to say, laser focused on what impacts the pandemic could have, in some ways in a greater unknown way, on where we might be.
Right.
I think you guys, I mean, I think it's, everybody said it. We have a lot of good reports, and in many ways that's a good thing. In many ways it makes your job harder because there's too much information. So I like the monthly report. I like the disbursements. I look at it. I do eyeball that one, and the monthly report. How I use it. I take it and I put certain things into an Excel spreadsheet and look at it differently. And sometimes I'll ask you a question. Sometimes it makes sense. It's just the trend. So for me, that works, that it's always on consent. And the what I'm going to say is that monthly forecast report that you both created last year was extremely helpful. In my opinion, I think now it's almost too much information. And maybe you take a poll of the trustees to say what slides really do important, and how do you get it down so that it's an efficient model and almost like a dashboard. What do we really need to know, and what are we focusing on? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe every trustee uses all 30 pages of it, or maybe we focus on a couple of things. For me, the hot button is always, do we have enough cash in the account?
Right.
All of this, and you've given me comfort there. So I don't think we need to do scenario 1 and scenario 2s anymore. But maybe, and if I'm wrong, that's fine. So I think you just take a poll. So, but I agree with, I think, with Trustee Kennedy, we're saying the same. A lot of great reports. Let's make sure we're being efficient with your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I get the sense you're doing that anyway. Am I wrong? For internal purposes, you're doing the same kind of scenario projections, or no? Is that only
Well, we would still continue to do all of those scenario projections, or at least monitor where we are at. And if things start to turn positive or turn negative, we would then take the opportunity to develop additional scenarios. But I don't think we would report out a lot of that information unless there was something that was noteworthy. I mean, if everything's progressing as it is expected, we would report to the board that things are progressing as expected on our revenue and expenditure side, and we would go on. We would leave it there.
Yeah, and I think that's key. That's what I guess maybe the dashboard would help. Is what do we need to know? What are you seeing that should draw the attention of the board and the residents?
Yeah, so maybe what we should take away from this is to tell the staff that we trust your judgment as to when it becomes sort of too much detail. When you think that there's no real purpose being served by having these monthly reports with scenario 1 and scenario 2 because things have leveled off and routinized a little bit more, maybe we will rely on your discretion to say we don't need to do this every month.
And I do like this idea, I think, as Trustee Kennedy said, of, highlighting specific things, because when we look, on the monthly reports, then we, kind of go off on tangents, and we want to ask about this and we want to ask about that. And I like that this is kind of breaking this down. So, we know what the topic is and we can understand it fully. And I think it kind of clarifies your role. I mean, we obviously don't want you guys to spend your time just doing reports if there are better things to do. Clearly, those monthly reports have been extremely helpful, and they've told us what's important. So I think we want to keep knowing, hit us over the head with what's important. But I do like breaking this down into different topics.
I agree entirely.
All right. So I think the feedback that I have from this discussion is really 2 items. One of them is that there's a like of the providing that focused review, but also to Trustee Sullivan's point earlier, we can work on developing kind of that reporting time frame that gives us a sense of when we can expect to see each one of those reports, so that we know we will potentially see December actuals or preliminary year-end information in the month of February or March of the following year. I think that that will be helpful to kind of set expectations of what information will be provided at what point in time.
I think that's right. Trustee Plunkett, do you agree?
I agree.
All right. So we can kind of work from there and then look to start mocking up a full calendar as potentially start looking at a mock-up of a potential report. I think we can also look at reaching out to all the members of the board to see what interest or what pieces of information they would like to see focused information on, if that's a fair assessment as well.
Yes.
All right. So I think the next steps associated with the reporting piece is that we can work through the monthly reporting aspect. And then from there are several other reports that we would want to look at: the year-end report, a mid-year financial report, and then looking at long-range forecasting. But really, those are discussions for future meetings. This is really just setting the table to say, let's focus our efforts on the monthly report, and then we can move into those different components throughout the year. All right. With that, I have no other additional items on for discussion. So I know that the next item is new business.
Excuse me, I hate to interrupt you. I think we have to ask whether there's been any request for public comment on the last two agenda items. Mr. Ortega, are we still alone?
Yep, still no comments on YouTube Live. And let me just double check our email address real quick. No emails at our public comment at wilmette.com email address either.
Okay, I will assume that there's no public comment at this point then. So as Mr. Hallgren said, next item is new business, and I don't believe there is any new business. The next item after that is old business, and I don't believe there's any old business. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? I'll second. Can I do that? I think so.
Second, I'll second. I'm having technical issues.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
Okay, and then I'll call the roll. Trustee Kennedy,
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett,
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a marathon meeting, obviously. I appreciate all of the time, attention, and forethought that went into